During the Cold War, sparring superpowers, the Soviet Union and the United States, raced to be the first world power to put a man on the moon, as a symbol of their scientific prowess and the superiority of their political philosophies. While the United States was eventually declared the winner in 1969 as Neil Armstrong stepped out into the lunar landscape, the Soviet Union was not without its own earlier victories. In 1961, Yuri Gagarin piloted the Vostok 1 to a successful orbit around the Earth for 108 minutes, before it safely returned to land, becoming the first human in history to do so. There are those who claim that Gagarin, while being the first to return safely, was not the first Soviet to make that journey to the Black Void, nor were the subsequent lunar efforts by the Soviets without casualties. The Soviet Union had a reputation, like many powerful regimes, of covering up any incidents that threatened its image as an infallible superpower, especially in relation to programs dedicated to showing up the US. How probable is it then that the names of those lost to the infinite embrace of space were also lost to history in an effort to maintain an impeccable facade? The justification for this theory stems from a couple of different perspectives. The Soviets were infamous for their ability to make people and families disappear, going so far as to airbrush individuals from photos, and they weren't exactly willing to share details on their various programs with the US or any other possible US informant. See my video on Bouvet Island for another example of this. There are also cases that skeptics point to, specifically to do with the Cosmonaut program, that might justify this theory of buried, failed missions. Valentin Bondarenko is such a case. Born in Soviet Ukraine, he was the youngest of 20 applicants accepted to take part in the Soviet Cosmonaut program, training to be part of the planned launch of the Vostok craft. Tragedy struck on the 23rd of March 1961 during the 10th day of a 15-day endurance training exercise, which involved Bondarenko staying inside a Surtova chamber, a low-pressure altitude container, with an atmosphere of 50% oxygen saturation. During the process of removing his monitoring biosensors and wiping his body with an alcohol-soaked cotton ball, he accidentally discarded the cotton ball onto a heated electric hot plate, which caused it to catch alight, immediately igniting the chamber's surface and Bondarenko's woolen training suit. As the chamber was pressurized, it could not be immediately opened, and by the time it was, Bondarenko had suffered third-degree burns over his entire body, repeating, "It was my fault. Don't blame anyone," as he was rescued. This story, while occurring in 1961, was only known to the Soviet public in 1986, being published by journalist Yaroslav Golovanov in the Izvestia newspaper. Bondarenko's face had been removed from official photos of cosmonaut applicants, and details of his life expunged from records. There are also critics of the record published by Golovanov, as it leaves many questions unanswered, such as why a heated stove was used in a highly oxygenated environment in the first place. Bondarenko's final remarks also conveniently exonerate any wrongdoing on the part of the monitoring scientists and mechanics, or any responsibility on the part of those overseeing the project. The tale of Vladimir Komarov, on the other hand, while not covered up, does highlight the possibility of previous launch failures. His module, the Soyuz 1, crash-landed on its return to the surface after the drogue and main-braking parachute failed to deploy correctly. This, after numerous equipment failures in orbit, caused his re-entry to be delayed, and the launch of the second Soyuz module to be postponed. This flight occurred post-Gagarin's success, and Gagarin was even named as the backup cosmonaut for the launch, though his status as a cultural icon meant that it was likely the Soviets wouldn't have put him at risk in that fashion again. Such a catastrophic failure happening after initial success caused suspicion that there was far more going on behind the scenes than was being reported. In his 1988 book Uncovering Soviet Disasters, James Oberg details further smaller cover-ups, like a cosmonaut by the name of Grigory Nelyobov being airbrushed from a widely circulated photo after being dismissed from the program for fighting some soldiers in a railway station. Others were also airbrushed from propaganda materials after being dropped for medical or political reasons. These incidents are part of what is used to justify that the early Soviet cosmonaut program claimed far more lives than the history books would have us believe. The following are some possible additions to the tally, some thoroughly debunked, while others still remain, at least partially, a mystery. With a name that sounds like the Russian villain in a Cold War-era action movie parody, you might assume that this character was a fake. And you'd be right. Ivanovich was the title given to a test dummy launched into orbit on the Korabl Sputnik 4 in 1961, alongside a dog and various reptiles, mice, and guinea pigs, in order to test the landing system upon the craft's return to Earth. Despite numerous attempts by the Soviets to distinguish Ivan from a real cosmonaut, an automatic recording of a choir was placed on his person so that any radio stations listening in wouldn't mistake it for live radio communication. The rumors still persisted of the Soviet space launch of 61, with the intrepid hero Ivan Ivanovich at the helm. Vladimir Ilyushin, on the other hand, is a very real individual. Born in 1927, he was the eldest son of a Soviet aircraft designer and had a lifelong ambition to be a test pilot for cutting-edge aircraft. Towards this goal, he became a qualified Soviet test pilot in 1952 and achieved numerous subsequent world altitude records in subsequent flights. In June 1960, however, he was involved in an automobile accident and had to be sent for special physical therapy during his recovery process. The day before Gagarin's flight, a British journalist by the name of Denis Ogden reported that the Soviets had launched a man into space, and that he had been injured. As Ilyushin was known for his aeronautic skill at this point, and was reportedly seen walking with a cane, most likely due to his accident the year prior, he was latched onto as the man who was behind the controls of this botched launch by subsequent reports. After Gagarin's successful launch, rumors persisted that he was in fact just a healthy stand-in for the real pilot, Ilyushin, who could not be paraded publicly due to his deteriorated emotional and physical state. The Ilyushin story was published not only in a Time magazine article in 1967, but even the 1964 version of Guinness Book of World Records included him as being involved in a manned spaceflight prior to Gagarin's. Gagarin's tragic death in a plane crash in 1968 was also considered by some to be sabotage on the part of those dedicated to preserving a specific version of Soviet history. The evidence for this theory is mostly tied to internal sources, as with Denis Ogden's initial breaking of the story, or interviews with those who claim inside knowledge on the events, such as a Captain Anatoly Gurchenko, who claims to have filmed Ilyushin's launch, and a Gordon Feller, who claims to have read Kremlin documents discussing the incident. While this evidence is not invalid necessarily, when compared with the many other detailed accounts of the Soviet cosmonaut program, as well as the diaries of those involved and in charge of many of the aspects of those efforts, it is difficult to favor the former narrative over the established one. The Torre B recordings, as they are known, are recordings of radio broadcasts by brothers Achille and Giovanni Battista Judica-Cordiglia, two amateur radio enthusiasts based out of a disused German bunker near Turin in northern Italy. The recordings were captured on their remarkable homemade listening station, equipped with a 40-foot octagonal dish antenna, and contain supposed evidence of Soviet launches unreported by state media at the time. The brothers intercepted numerous Soviet broadcasts during the early 1960s, but here are some of the main ones. A Morse code signal in November of 1960, translated into SOS to the whole world, presumably from a spaceship in trouble. Hard breathing and heartbeats from a dying cosmonaut in February of 1961. A female voice picked up on June 14th in 1963, 2 days before Valentina Tereshkova's recorded launch in the Vostok 6. I'll play a portion of this recording for you now. They also reported intercepting communications signaling imminent launches in September and November 1962, coinciding with actual failed launches around those timeframes. As you can imagine, these discoveries garnered them significant media attention, so much so that some journalists actually stayed with the brothers at their station in order to be present when the interceptions occurred. This placed immense pressure on Achille and Giovanni Battista to produce something noteworthy during that time, and critics emphasized this point when debunking the recordings as sensationalist fabrications. While the veracity of each individual recording is still debated, there's certainly something to be said about the ingenuity of the brothers themselves, as well as the public's voracious appetite at the time for any news said to be exposing Soviet secrets, regardless of their origin. Outer space, as the final and possibly infinite frontier, promises equal parts danger and wonder to those able to reach it. Of course, it also promises many other things far more tangible and useful to those in power down here on Earth. What it promised during the Cold War was more of a symbolic victory, but one that would have far-reaching consequences. A proof of superiority, one that would be witnessed by the world over, but also a proclamation of intent that could not be ignored. To this end, who knows how much was sacrificed by those desperate to achieve this goal, over and above the tallies we are already aware of. How many figures airbrushed from history, corpses buried in unmarked graves, untold heroes of their respective sides forced into obscurity for the sake of a narrative. If there's one thing the fall of the Soviet Union and the subsequent glasnost has confirmed, it's that these giant regimes of history and their achievements are most often built upon a sea of anonymous souls.